Okay. All right. Well, welcome to the Diverse Pedagogies of Medievalism from the Marmo Conference in Lincoln. There's, well, 5 of us here today live, and also Carol Robinson, who's going to be presenting by video and then hopefully joining us for the question and answer session at the end. So we'll start in a second, but I just want to introduce the panelists. So Kim Wilkins teaches creative writing at the University of Queensland, and is a writer herself with more than 20 novels for adults and children across multiple genres under her own name and her pen name, Kimberly Freeman. Her books have been translated into more than a dozen languages. She also writes academic articles and book chapters on genre fiction and video gaming. I'm Helen Young. I'm an honorary associate of the Department of English at Sydney University. I have, at the moment, 2 books on medievalism out in the last couple of weeks, Fantasy and Science Fiction Medievalism and the Middle Ages in Popular Culture, and a book on race and fantasy coming out in a couple of months from Rutledge. Molly Brown, who's next down along the table, is Professor and Head of Department of English, Language and Literature at the University of Pretoria, and her primary research interest is in fantasy, whether written for adults or children. She teaches an honour course in children's literature and has supervised postgraduate research in that field. And her publications are in journals including The Lion and the Unicorn, Museon, the English Academy Review, and Papers Explorations in Children's Literature. She also has a chapter in the Middle Ages in Popular Culture, recently out. Dorothy Kim is an assistant professor of English at Vassar College, has recently spent the 2013 to 2014 year as a Frankel Fellow at the Institute of Advanced Judaic Studies at the University of Michigan, finishing a book on Ankara and the Jews. The book reframes the category of Jew/Christians as not just a history of integration, acculturation, persecution, but as a history of entanglements. She's about to receive an advanced contract from the University of Toronto Press for that book. She's also scheduled to write a book for ARC Press on the unbearable whiteness of medieval studies, and has another book, Music, Multimodality and Remediating the Medieval Lyric, currently under review as well. Our final speaker in the room today is Jonathan Chu, is Associate Professor of English at George Washington University, where he's also a founding co-director of the George Washington Digital Humanities Institute. His interests include Chaucer translation studies and intersections between medieval culture and new media. He's the author of Trading Tongues, Merchants, Multilingualism and Medieval Literature from Ohio State University Press in 2013, and co-directs the Global Chaucers Project, an online and real-life community of people interested in Chaucer's modern reception across the globe. And our final speaker, who will be coming to us via video and hopefully an online link up as well, is Carol Robinson, who's an Associate Professor at Kent State University with a PhD and MA from the University of Georgia. Her research interests include medievalism, film, video games, and American deaf culture. And her recent publications include neo-medievalism in the media, co-edited with Pam Clements. Okay, so that's everybody who's going to be on the panel. Kim's going to start for us.
Certainly. Well, this necessarily brief overview is going to be about how I've taught medievalism from the inside. That is, from the perspective of those who recreate the Middle Ages in creative writing, as I do, as Helen's introduction made clear. I teach medievalism as a component of an advanced undergraduate writing course titled Creative Writing Genre Fiction. No prizes for guessing which genre I teach medievalism in, at the University of Queensland, back home in Australia. This year we read Lord of the Rings and The Game of Thrones beside each other to work through a range of issues around research and craft. Our key questions were about medievalism, in particular, what medievalism affords creative writers in terms of the building blocks of story. Today I've only got time to focus on 2 key aspects of storytelling, and I've chosen to speak about setting, it would be an obvious one with fantasy fiction, and characters. This explanation of what we call a practice-led research approach, I hope, will show you some of the processes by which various aspects of the medieval get used, reused, discarded, brought back to life, and so on. The reasons that we sometimes do the things we do in fantasy novels may be simpler than you think. So my students and I read these texts as writers, seeking to unlock the aspects of craft that, in this case, Tolkien and Martin have made use of, sort of to evaluate the potential of that aspect of craft for our own writing. So first, I'm going to talk to you about setting, medievalism and setting in fantasy fiction. And I'm going to start by looking at a couple of descriptions of medieval cities from Tolkien and Martin to see what they're doing. Now, I've just got that down here on my phone so I can read it for you. The first from Lord of the Rings. Then turning south again, Frodo beheld Minas Tirith. Far away it seemed, and beautiful, white-walled, many-towered, proud and fair upon its mountain seat. Its battlements glittered with steel, and its turrets were bright with many banners. And George R.R. Martin on King's Landing. Now the city covered the shore as far as Caitlin could see, manses and arbours and granaries, brick storehouses and timber inns and merchant stalls, taverns and graveyards and brothels, all piled one on another. So obviously towers, turrets, battlements, banners, timber, merchant stalls, taverns and brothels, all signifiers of the medieval city. And in both examples, the city is described from a distance through the eyes of a focalizing character. And this technique zooms the reader out and suggests wide scope and large scale. And these are one of the key pleasures of fantasy fiction is, of course, its epic scope. So we talk about how to create that in fantasy fiction. Both descriptions to layer images on top of one another to create a sense of proliferation. And again, this is another key pleasure of the genre of fantasy fiction, the idea that things proliferate and sort of extend, maybe even beyond the text. However, we also talk about how each author uses the technique for different purposes. So Tolkien's quotation creates height and light, both literally and figuratively. The city's all walls, towers, mountains, white, fair, glittering, and bright. And these traits are associated with the pride and beauty of the city itself, and by extension, its history, its citizens, its rulers, and so on. Whereas King's Landing, by contrast, is more interested in that textured detail of medieval life on the ground. For example, the triptych of taverns and graveyards and brothels, alcohol, death and sex, collected and glued together grammatically in one phrase. In Caitlin's viewpoint, these buildings are all piled one on another in a way that makes the city seem crowded and dense compared to the lofty air and light of Minas Tirith. And we spend a lot of time in creative writing class talking about the verb choice, and I will just point out to you the verbs chosen to represent how the viewpoint characters here are experiencing the scenes are also different. Frodo beholds Minas Tirith, an archaic term, resonances of biblical affect. Caitlin merely sees King's Landing. To behold is to be something divine, and to see places the focalizer on the same plane of groundedness as the image. And I think the difference points to Martin's rejection of the heroic mythic Middle Ages in favour of, the grim dark Middle Ages is a topic that I've heard even just today several times. Both, of course, are constructions of the Middle Ages, and we talk about that too. And one of the tutorial activities that students have is to take the Middle Ages and start creating a story and see how far they get before they hit resistance, before they realise that the Middle Ages, as they understand it, isn't going to yield what they needed to yield for their story. And just FYI, the first place they always hit is gender, which is interesting if you start to think about, the amount of talking we do about female characters in medieval video games and in medieval stories, and medieval fantasy stories, and so on, where we need to start bending the truth. And then just briefly, in terms of character, did that work? Yeah. In terms of character, and this is an interesting insight, I hope. Another thing that medieval gives us is feudal hierarchies. It gives us kings and queens and people with absolute power. And the genre is often criticised for this, with the critics usually sort of arguing that, this genre looks back to feudal times with affection. But there's a really fantastic craft reason for using kings and queens. They very evidently have a lot more at stake than peasants. If a peasant screws up at work, a turkey might die. If a king screws up at work, armies die, realms go bankrupt, Vikings come in and burn everything. So narration around highly dramatic events is enabled by using vocalizing characters from the ruling classes. Medieval war strategy, for example, allows a bird's eye view of large conflicts being foreshadowed. I don't want to read it out because I don't think I've got time, but there's a whole lot of language here about the force, the archers, the host, the foot, the horsemen, these collective terms for people that Rob and Emma are thinking about here. The men, the household, the Westfold men. And then there's this wonderful line about the threat of a devastating force. And what we've got there is masses of people's lives at stake with a great devastating force heading. I mean, this is conflict in characters. These are the building blocks of story. Just sort of very evident. If Emma screws this up more than a turkey, is going to have some trouble. As Varys says in Game of Thrones, it's always the innocents who suffer most when you High Lords play your Game of Thrones. High Lords possess the perspective and dramatic possibilities necessary for a genre that's big in scope. That's why the book is called A Game of Thrones and not A Game of Chairs, as I like to tell my students. I think I'll wrap up there because I'm pretty sure I'm on the 7-minute mark, so thanks very much.
Okay. Excellent. So I was going to speak on teaching racial literacy through video games, but I realised that would take a lot more than 6 or 7 minutes. So I've compressed it by making the topic slightly broader and going for teaching racial literacy through medievalism. About a week ago, possibly a little bit more now, Jonathan started a Twitter conversation asking what insights can we offer today about race and whiteness in response to, mainly to the lastRhodesian.com manifesto and the recent massacre in Charleston. And one of the many responses was from Carl Steele saying our goal as medievalists is to disrupt the racist Europe. So what he means is this idea that Europe in the Middle Ages belonged to white people, that it was entirely inhabited by them, and also that it was an entirely Christian continent for upwards of 1,000 years, which doesn't bear up to historical scrutiny very well, but it's an idea that's very pervasive in contemporary popular culture. So I've used medievalism as a way to talk about race, and specifically a way to talk about whiteness, both in courses on medievalism and also in courses that focus on race and representation. So this is something where different kinds of students with different interests can encounter these ideas. So I want to give you a quick sense of what racial literacy actually is. It's a particular approach to racism and also very much to anti-racism. So obviously you can see from the slide there's 6 components as it was conceived of by Franz Twine, who first came up with the construct. The one I'm going to talk about particularly, or that I use medievalism particularly to talk about, is this one, the definition of racism as a contemporary problem rather than as a historical legacy. So there's a very strong tendency in modern culture to think about racism as something that happened in the past, or as something that's now kind of, it's not a problem that we as modern people have. There's this idea that we're not racist, but maybe our grandparents are. And so one of the sort of moves of racial literacy is to try and get students to understand that no, racism is actually a problem of the here and now, that it might come from, or that it does come from historical contexts, but that it has very real impacts, that it's a present problem. Bless you. So the way I've sort of gone about this is by talking about the way that Western popular culture whitewashes the Middle Ages, rendering its people racially white in ways that ignore historical detail and evidence while actively claiming historical authenticity and historical accuracy. And this is something that gets attached to gender often as well. This belief attaches both temporal and geographical limits to medieval, so that it explicitly denotes the European Middle Ages, which are taken to be the exclusive cultural heritage of those individuals and groups who claim membership of the white race, which I would also add is a social construct that expands and contracts according to context. So this idea of Europe, it's this idea of Europe that Carl was saying, we need to disrupt this. That's one of our sort of jobs as medievalists. And that very idea that Europe was sort of white and Christian is certainly a product of quite a long history of academic work and of medieval studies teaching, as much as it is popular culture getting these ideas from nowhere. So there's a certain sort of disciplinary responsibility that comes with teaching medieval studies. So there's an incident that happened last year that's an interesting sort of focus point, and that students have found illuminating, I suppose is one word. So the blogger known as Medieval POC, who produces this really amazing Tumblr resource showing people of colour in medieval art history, wrote at one point last year, citing quite a wide range of academic sources, suggesting that a realistic video game set in central Bohemia in the sort of high Middle Ages could include characters of multiple ethnicities without being historically inaccurate. Now this was latched onto by a particularly virulent internet crowd, and she received rape and death threats across weeks in response to this. Now, what I think is particularly telling about this incident, and what I've talked about with students of race and of medievalism, is the question to ask is, why does it matter to these people so much that this game be historically accurate? And that's the point where it really reveals the fact that it's not about history at all. They don't really care whether the game is anachronistic or not. I'm sure Kim would attest that many genre historical fantasy texts include historical inaccuracies without eliciting any sort of response like this. And what the only sort of conclusion that I can draw, and my students have been able to draw, is that the reason that these people have such violent responses is that it's about race now. It's not about race in the Middle Ages. Nobody cares about the Middle Ages that much, right? I can even say that to this crowd. Or at least I don't think anybody should care about the Middle Ages, and we just can't see that they do. So medievalism is attached to all sorts of discourses. We know this, but often it's taught. And I did a survey about a year ago of people teaching medievalism and what they use it for, and it's really used most often in the classroom as ways into the Middle Ages. So into talking in history classrooms or in literature classrooms, into talking about medieval texts. But it's attached in our society, in our culture, to so many different discourses, whether they're around race or gender or politics. And it has so much potential for teaching things that aren't just medieval studies. And that was one of the catalysts for organising this panel, to look at and to find out what different things people are using medievalism to talk about and how. So I'll pass along to our next speaker, Molly.
Hi everybody, including the electronic ghosts. My children, in common with most South Africans, got their formal introduction to the Middle Ages at around about the age of 10, when the government syllabus lists the Middle Ages as some appropriate theme around which classroom activities can cluster. So for about a month, they built and measured cardboard castles, they subtracted maidens from dragons, And each child gave themselves a medieval name and designed for themselves a cardboard medieval shield. One of the more enterprising girls in my daughter's class produced a fabulous shield, a central baobab tree with lions rampant and crocodiles couchant at the bottom, and announced proudly to the class that she was Sir Gadonad of the Bushveld. The class burst into laughter because, as my daughter confided afterwards, everyone knows there were never knights in South Africa. Some 10 years later, when students arrive in my honours romance course at the University of Pretoria, the enterprising Sir Gadonads of the Veldt are nowhere to be found. They have all accepted that medieval literature is something utterly alien to their own place and time. They do the course either because they're short of credits and perhaps misinterpreted the title, or because, and perhaps this is even more alarming, in a divided and rather fraught society like South Africa, they feel that the Middle Ages is the equivalent of a beach holiday, somewhere where they can relax and not worry about the contemporary world at all. Now, I believe that in Britain the government has said that it's happy to have a few medievalists around for decorative purposes, but I don't like to think of my course as a decorative course. So the problem becomes how to encourage real engagement, not only with the texts, but with themselves as creatures living in a historical moment and with their own interaction with those texts. And I began fairly conventionally by thinking that it might be a good idea to introduce the Lord of the Rings into the end of the text. But that didn't work terribly well. The resentful group found it equally alien and dispiriting, and the nostalgic group found it was easier to read than Spencer and just as attractive to dream of Gondor as it might have been to think about Camelot. And so I went back to the drawing board and thought about the course again. And about this stage, I read Lisa Lampert-Weissig's Medieval Literature and Post-Colonial Studies. And she, of course, looks at the way in which the ideas which shape the present often can be seen to have had their genesis in the medieval period. But I was struck by a particular comment of hers in which she said that it's only by acknowledging a longer history of colonialism, one that exists across cultures, that we can see how medieval history, culture, and literature are fundamental to an understanding of the processes of colonialism. And that sent me back to various colonial texts dealing with South Africa, where I found that people who were part of the colonial experience were not just subliminally influenced by medieval ideas, they expressed their own encounter with Africa in quite overtly colonial terms. So John Buchan, for instance, in his autobiography, Memory Hold the Door, which is published in America under the very medieval title of The Pilgrim's Way, says of his friend Basil Blackwell, "The phrase Elizabethan, too casually applied, can be used with truth of Basil. He was of the same breed as the slender gallants who singed the beard of the King of Spain, and like Essex tossed their plumed hats into the sea in joy of the enterprise, or who sold their swords to whatever cause had daylight and honour in it. His like had left their bones in further spaces than any race on earth, and from their uncharted wanderings our empire was born, and wherever romance called, he followed with careless gallantry." And of course, once you start thinking thinking about colonial romance in this way, you led perhaps inevitably to Rider Haggard, and so I came, in fact, to his romance She, which is often and easily criticized for medievalizing Africa and Africans in largely pejorative ways, but which can also quite clearly be read as a traditional quest narrative. The immortal Ayesha, the eponymous She, is the dark, though also this is late 19th century, incongruously white mirror image of figures like Guinevere or Galadriel. But she is also their sexually libidinous inverse, of whom the narrator says, "Though the face before me was that of a young woman of certainly not more than 30 years, in perfect health and the first flush of ripened beauty, yet it bore stamped upon it a seal of unutterable experience and of deep acquaintance with grief and passion. Not even the slow smile that crept about the dimples of her mouth could hide the shadow of sin and sorrow." Heart of Darkness, I think. In this way, what Haggard clearly does is revisit courtly love paradigms in ways that beautifully illustrate his narrator's own claim. That which is alive hath known death, and that which is dead can never die. For in the circle of the spirit, life is naught, and death is naught. Yea, all things live forever, though at times they sleep and are forgotten. Don't worry, I'm not going to burst into the Lion King music at this point, but it does make the point that certain impulses in our story-making mind tend to repeat themselves in different contexts. But nonetheless, I was still working with white writers, and it's with some excitement that I'm now planning to bring into the course an epic poem by Mosisi Konene called Emperor Shaka the Great, which was published in 1979. It's a curious text, this. Konene claims that it was based on traditional Zulu oral poetry, though scholars have argued about this, how much he's actually invented and how much he has translated. It's a poem which celebrates the life of Shaka Zulu and deliberately reassesses those aspects of his reign conventionally seen by Western historians as having been particularly violent or repressive. In a way, it positions him as a model for how Black Africans, or at least Black South Africans, can rule themselves using African values. I'm told it was even distributed in some quarters to ANC guerrillas to inspire them in the fight against apartheid. The poem, though, is a fascinating counterpoint or counter-voice to Mallory's Morte d'Arthur. They're both works that celebrate legendary leaders, that glorify military conquest, that play, to put it mildly, fast and loose with sources, that are infused with cultural nostalgia, and have been used and misused in the promotion of narrow nationalisms. I'm hoping that in viewing Konene's poem through a medieval lens, students can be encouraged to see some of the features that they might have found disturbing in European medieval romances are by no means confined to the long ago and far away. What I hope to achieve by this, and it's very much a work in progress, is to offer students an experience of medievalism in terms of, I suppose, transculturation, which David Atwell suggests involves multiple processes, a dialogue in both directions. In that way, I suppose I'm also echoing Catherine Brown's suggestion that post-colonial theory can help the living to construct a non-appropriative dialogue with the dead, providing a model for relation to the past, that allows for and encourages the very particular and concrete liveliness of two historical moments, while refusing to obscure their differences. Wish me luck.
Dorothy?
So this is thinking about the critical theory class, the gender and critical theory class, and also for people interested in teaching women in medieval literature or a medieval mysticism class. So a bit more specialized. So gender, medieval studies, and critical race theory. So in this very brief talk, I'd like to tackle medievalism from a less frequently considered angle. How do medieval figures and texts help shape women of color critical race theory? Originally, I hoped to discuss both the influential work of Gloria Anzaldua's Borderlands, La Frontera, and Teresa Hargam-Child's Dictée to evaluate how medieval religious women have influenced these two key texts of ethnic American feminist discourse. However, I realized I had no time, and I still really don't have time to go over much about Anzaldua's stuff. So bear with me. If you have questions about Shaw, feel free to ask me during the Q&A. I'd be happy to talk about it. Amy Hollywood's book, Sensible Ecstasy, Mysticism, Sexual Difference, and the Demands of History, has considered how medieval female mystical writing played a part in fashioning contemporary theory in the works of George Bataille, Simone de Beauvoir, Luce Irigaray, and Lacan. Though her methodological model is incredibly useful for us, I would like to use this time to think about critical race theory in relationship to queer theory. In the case of Anzaldúa, how she used figures of medieval women to revision feminist theory. I would like to focus on the poetic sections of her work in Borderlands, rarely read or critically discussed, and her piece on Teresa of Avila's death, translation, and the breakup of her body into individual relics. I'm interested in how medieval theories of Furta Sacra, the theft of the saint's body, become an alternative way for Anzaldúa to think about queer bodies. Critics rarely address the second half of Borderlands and her poetry, though it's starting to happen slowly. I think, from what I understand from my Chicano scholar friend, one reason has been that it has taken some time for critics to speak of Anzaldúa's interests in things like out-of-body experiences, alien abductions, and alternative spirituality. The sort of secret thing they didn't want to talk about. Recently, Tace Hedrick's work on Anzaldúa's altered states and New Age philosophy has argued for the inclusion of her philosophical, religious, New Age beliefs as part of the formation of her queer mestizaje feminism. Different interviews and other pieces that she has written speak directly about her focus in experiencing different spiritual planes, the magical mushroom conversation. But in Borderlands, I believe she gives us clues as to how readers should frame border queerness, not just through her discussion of Aztec spirituality, but also through her poetry about alien embodiment and the bodily relics of Teresa of Avila. She has two poems sitting on a border between two sections in the second half of the book. The first one, Interface, ends part 3, which is entitled Crossers, and the next poem, Holy Relics, starts section 4, the I can never say this word, Tihuatl Yotl Women Alone section. These two poems are two sides of the same critical conversation about embodiment and border identity. So I'd like to start by considering Holy Relics first, so going backward. This poem would be incredibly familiar to medievalists in the room because Anzaldúa outlines the long history of Furta Sacra or relic theft through a narrative of what happens to Teresa of Avila's bones. She documents each violent cut, each time another group would come and steal parts of Avila's body, and how her proliferating body parts enact miracles. Anzaldúa is intimately knowledgeable with what medievalists would identify as a standard trope in the translatio of saintly bodies, the smell of the bodies, the miracles involved, etc. In this poem, it is always the men, the priests, the popes, the duke, who have done violence to Avila's body. And then she punctuates the poem with the following refrain: "We are the holy relics, the scattered bones of the saint, the vessel of bones of Spain, we seek each other." The invocation of Teresa of Avila, the 16th century Carmelite nun who wrote interior castles, references mystical writings specifically interested in the spiritual union of individual believers with God. And I would argue that Dua's invocation of mystical spirituality informs her own framing of queer border feminism, especially in its embodiment. The poem Before Holy Relics is interfaith. The piece references a previous line in Dua's Borderland in the Entering the Serpent section. Here, she writes, quote, "Not only was the brain split into two functions, but so was reality. Thus, people who inhabit both realities are forced to live in the interface between the two, forced to become adept at switching modes. Such is the case with the India and the Mestiza," unquote. But here she thinks about bodily becoming, bodily transformation, but starts out with an alien spiritual presence. And this is the interface poem, who cannot be seen by anyone else but her. She writes, "Once I accidentally ran my arm through her body, felt heat on one side of my face. She wasn't solid. The shock pushed me against the wall. A torrent of days swept past me before I tried to see her again. She had never wanted to be flesh. She told me until she met me. At first it was hard to stay on the border between the physical world and hers. It was only there at the interface that we could see each other. See, we wanted to touch. I wish I could become pulsing color, pure sound, bodiless as she. It is impossible," she said, "for humans to become nominal." Dua at the end of the poem named this unembodied spirit while she's explaining to her family at Christmas who this person is. They sort of ask her, "Is she a lev?" And she replies, "I said no, just an alien." These two poems are a poetic form of switching modes, an example of interface between two different idioms of bodily spiritual understanding. Both inform Dua's queer Chicana feminism. However, I believe that if you understand the medievalism of her invocation of Avila, and thus understand the long tradition of feminist mystical spirituality that allowed for individual ecstasy with alien spiritual bodies, so much of part one makes sense if you understand that. The presence of an alien in Dua's work is not out of sync. Rather, it fits into a longer tradition and a longer view of her own specific remediation of mystical spirituality that reframes, or that frames our queer, this frames out her queer critical race theory.
All right. So I'm going to be moving through many different slides here, but what I can do is I can provide a bibliography at the end of this with a link to all the different things that I'm showing you. So most of these things are very easily Googleable, so you can find them if you're interested in this. So what I'd like to do is offer some remarks on teaching about that across modern day appropriation, across different cultures and across different media. My interests here grow out of my work in co-directing the Global Chaucer's Project at Campus Barrington. This work connects translators, poets, and scholars who are interested in the global reception of Chaucer's work in contemporary culture around the world. Chaucer's adaptations exist on every continent in many languages, and in many media formats, so from YouTube to film to comic books, you name it. The Wife of Bath is especially open to reinvention by poets, playwrights, and screenwriters across the world. Jean Breeze's much anthologized poem, The Wife of Bath Speaks in Bricks and Market, translates The Wife of Bath's prologue into Jamaican patois. Patience Godfrey's dramatic monologue reincarnates Alison Bath as one Mrs. Alice Baby Bob, a Nigerian immigrant who discloses her life history while advertising her wares. So she's selling cloth, obviously. And more, another contemporary example is Anglo-Canadian rapper Bob Brinkman, who impersonates the character of the wife through hip-hop signs. Okay, so each of these performances provides students with an opportunity to consider how Middle English gets adapted into a radically new contemporary context. Chaucer's the wife back, of course, in her own day as well as our own, is a controversial figure, married 5 times, inheriting the wealth of her husbands. She's notoriously bold, vulgar, open to her sexuality, and she's larger than life in the original text. She's bold and proud of hue. She's a weaver. She wears costly red garments that weigh 10 pounds of cloth on her head, and she's disruptive, right? Her manner provokes strong ripple effects by others around her. The prologue makes the case that her own lived experience as a woman counts more than other kinds of authority, so maybe scripture and learned texts by men. So after the reading of life back in our classes, discussing the glossing of scripture and medieval preaching practices, my classes often turn to modern adaptations to look at a performance slightly differently. So here's Jean Breeze again. She's a Black British poet with Jamaican ancestry who recorded her own performance of her reimagined Life of Bath, who speaks in Jamaican Creole. In preparing for class discussions like this, our students will read Breeze's rendition and also watch her performance of this work on YouTube, asking what new questions arise in these two media. In the assignment handout, I provide the opening lines of Chaucer's original and the opening of Breeze's adaptation. So you've got them on the screen. Chaucer's wife begins famously, "Experience of non forteor in this world is great enough for me to speak a word that is my large. For knowledge, speak well near was a barge, not to be God that is Carolina, whose good is a church door, ye have not if ye so often would be very bad." Breeze opens like this, and I'm not going to try to do the accent here. "My life is of my own Bible, when it comes to all the woes and married life. But since I reached 12 takes to eternal God, it's my gospel I have, if that possible." In my History of the English Language courses, we identify how features of Jamaican patois diverge from so-called standard American English. D substitutions for TH sounds, when, and text for when, for, thanks. In my literature courses, we stress close reading, and we take apart this poem, thinking about how Breeze enacts a line-by-line distillation or medieval abbreviatio in each case. In both classes, we ask how a distinctively non-standard variety of English resonates with Chaucer's historical writing in an emergent vernacular of Middle English. Breeze takes her adaptation even further by embodying the Life of Bath on-site in Brixton Market, the so-called soul of Black Britain, where she speaks directly to an unknown interlocutor, the camera person. Now, in watching this video, we consider how Breeze's performance, her costume, her headdress, her gesture, her movement, her face, reactions of passers-by establish the Life of Bath's disruptive force. So for more about teaching Breeze, you can also see my blog posts on the local Chaucer's website, and there's a bibliography there if you're interested. Patience of Godby, alternative her, is a British poet and performance artist who combines the wise prologue and tale into one single dramatic monologue. Her rendition exists in print in Telling Tales, just released by Candidate in 2014, and an online video. In presenting herself as a Nigerian immigrant giving a sales pitch, Godby invites us to see the wife as a traveler, a businesswoman, and a stand-up comic. So if you watch this YouTube video, you'll find that laughter by the audience is a key part of what this performance is about. I'll end with this example of an Anglo-Canadian rapper, Bob Brinkman, who offers 2 renditions of the Life of Bath. So the prologue and tale are the rap Canterbury Tales from 2004, and later a substantial reworking of the Canterbury Tales remix 2012. Each recording is free online with all the lyrics available. In my classes, we approach Brinkman's work as expansive revision. Brinkman's style shifts over time, but his early 2000s work using internal rhyme that evokes, and this is his own website, he's using color coding to indicate internal rhyme in his hip-hop rendition of the Partner's Tale. His rhyming practice resonates with another famous rapper, Eminem. So the late 1990s metrical practice of this rapper. So here's another example, Lose Yourself, using these same sorts of internal rhyme patterns. His newer remix, though, breaks that mold with allusions to modern-day female figures. U.S. Supreme Court Justice late Elena Kagan makes an appearance alongside British actress Keira Knightley. One intriguing topic that comes up, of course, with this particular adaptation is the ethics of cultural appropriation. How do we think about an Anglo-white presenting Canadian adopting this form that's historically associated with African-American culture? What's the effect of this sort of voicing? By bringing these works in conversation with specific features of Chaucer's language, students can gain exposure to, quote, world Englishes, but also hone their skills in comparative literary analysis, tracking how language changes across time and space. As teaching tools, neo-Chaucerian adaptations can be useful not only for medieval literature or history of the English language, but also for world literature courses, post-colonial studies, and new media studies as well. Each reinvention of the Latin math is an embodied performance and an interpretation, an act that reanimates Chaucer and critically reorients medieval culture. Thank you.
Okay, we're just going to mute, have 5 minutes time out and mute the microphone in this room. So if you're watching on YouTube, we're going to be quiet for a couple of minutes while we try and bring in our remote speaker. So if you do want to think about sending us a question, there's a link underneath the YouTube feed that you can follow and enter the little code there, and we'll get a text question. But yeah, give us a couple of minutes while we try and bring in Carol remotely. Okay, so we're back streaming with sound now. If you're watching online, we're having a little bit of problems getting the video presentation to run through our speakers and not give terrible feedback. So I've just posted a separate link in the comments underneath the YouTube feed. So you should go and watch that in another browser window now while we watch it here. A quick note of introduction from Carol. So the beginning of the video is an attempt at deconstructing binary oppositions. Also, the two former students were in her Chaucer class at Kent State University, Trumbull, which is located in a part of Ohio that is not yet recovered from the closing of steel mills in the 1970s. So we're going to watch the video now in the room. If you're watching on YouTube from home or your office or wherever, the link should be there in the comments. Follow that now and we'll come back to our question and answer session. The video is 7 minutes, so we'll come back in probably about 8 minutes. Okay.
I can't hear you.
Okay, so
Now I can hear you.
all right, excellent. So we have Carol on audio. Unfortunately, we couldn't figure out a way to get her on video as well.
That's okay with me.
So I hope nobody else minds. So we did have a couple of questions from people watching the live stream, but just to give them a little while to catch up with us, I thought we'd start the questions from the room. So, questions for the panel. No? Okay. Well, from around the world, I had one from Brett Steele in South Africa, who asked about why the panel thinks that race is becoming such an important thing in I guess in our scholarly discussions now, whether it's that we're finding more out about race in the Middle Ages, whether that's part of it, or whether it's more about the fact that globally race is becoming a bigger issue, I guess, in Western society. People are talking about it a little bit more. So, what do we think?
Well, I think, at least speaking from the US, I think given a lot of high-profile events that have really, showcased how racial violence is a really systemic issue, and it's not a problem that we dealt with in the historical past, but something that urgently erupts into the present. And so, I guess I would just say for a lot of my students who, I teach at a diverse campus, in an urban setting. A lot of students are involved in politics or activism or in communities, and I think that's often kind of a way of thinking about how literature brings some sort of tactical urgency to what they do outside of class, thinking about the concepts that they're interested in, and trying to think about what they do in the classroom could actually contribute to what they're thinking about. So I guess that's my observational perspective.
But isn't it also, how you write yourself about this?
Right.
Isn't it also about the fact that the field history hasn't really dealt with this?
Yeah.
And so it's almost in this interesting way, simultaneously playing catch up, both in sort of thinking about race in the Middle Ages, but also thinking about more people of color who are medievalists. And that is sort of intersecting with what is happening more globally, or for us in the US, what's happening in the US. So it's all sort of, happening simultaneously. So it's all kind of hitting the note at the same time.
Yeah, I think I don't know, but I think there's sort of been a disciplinary move really since about 2000. I mean, the kind of earliest major text that I know of to really start talking about these kinds of issues was the post-colonial Middle Ages, and that collection and the sort of rise of post-colonial theory following that, I think has cleared, I don't know, cleared the ground, or cleared the way is the right turn of phrase, but has opened up some thinking and opened up some questions that were not being asked before.
I think it's the whole thing that there's no such thing as a detached approach or a neutral observer. You see what your situation enables you to see. And if your situation changes, it enables you to see new things. And it's always quite exciting to pursue those and be aware of them. The Middle Ages is always ultimately a construct. We construct it out of our time and place and our concerns. And if we do it any other way, then that's when I think we become dishonest, when we don't acknowledge our own shaping of what we see. Yeah.
Okay. Other questions? Did I see a hand up there? No? Okay, sorry, I'm in the dark here. So. Okay, no, Andrew's got a question. Excellent.
It's not a question, it's just a very hard form of thought. But what we would like. I do know we can only work in the Middle Ages with our own headsets and in our own time, and we legitimately ask questions in the Middle Ages which wouldn't have been asked in the Middle Ages themselves because they belong to us. I guess one has to be willing in the Middle Ages to disappoint our best intentions. Sometimes to be incorrigible, to be sort of uncooperative with what we'd like. So they're not totally naughty as what I'm getting at. So I suppose just as if one thinks that race is a really important issue, one's thinking about kind of actualities, institutional actualities, life actualities, and I think one has to get them into the Middle Ages too. They're not just something we can perform in order to achieve the kind of result that we would like. They resist us. See what I'm getting at? It's unformed, but it's something. Things that get in the way. So.
Is there a specific area? I mean, you talk about race. Is that particularly the area that you're sort of wondering? Can the Middle Ages have enough material process for us to talk about that in the past, or is there a specific area that you're thinking about more generally?
I guess I was thinking about the way in which medieval texts, medieval parts often use in exceptionality in modern ways to create a sort of liberal agenda. And I just wonder whether there isn't something so inherently conservative about medieval, so inherently hierarchical and authoritarian about those medieval structures that just don't lend themselves to kind of liberal.
But they could lend themselves, couldn't they, to a critical race and whiteness kind of framework, to look at the history of whiteness and what whiteness has been responsible for.
I'm not arguing against that at all. I'm just.
I think the panel earlier that I was in, where someone was discussing the video games and the question of thinking through feudal structures in a video game, but was pointing out, as a historian, that in fact the game is sort of reifying this hierarchical idea, when that's not the case, from what the historians have figured out, that in fact the fluidity theory is not a nation state. The game is interested in building a nation state, in building a kind of colonial power, but the history is actually telling us something completely different from the documents, from the sort of research, that it's much more fluid, that there is, it's about kinship groups. So I think that the thing is, actually, I would say the Middle Ages offers, I mean, we're talking 1,000 years, and a lot of different places, and local, things on the ground, but it offers a lot of possibility. I mean, I think part of the reason I was always interested in the Middle Ages is that it was always about possibility, that they would try anything, that it was incredibly experimental and interested in new things and sort of seeing what would actually work or stick and things like that. So there wasn't a sort of reification or hierarchy, that it was always much more slippery. So I think if that helps answer that question. So even in thinking about, government structures or political structures, in fact, the history, the documents, the evidence, even though we're trying to push away from empiricism, actually tells us that it's not that. It's actually much more this other thing, and it's dependent on local considerations and all sorts of other factors.
Kim, you were talking about how your students get stuck on the Middle Ages when you said you have a tube exercise where they get stuck on them.
Yeah, so they have to come up with a story, but it has to be set in the Middle Ages, and they have to just keep going until they hit a wall where history, as they understand it, because they're not necessarily, they've got a lay knowledge of the Middle Ages and what that means, where they realise, oh, I can't actually have an army of women warriors, so I'm going to have to reach for fantasy. I mean, that's one of the reasons fantasy, I think one of the things fantasy does very well is it goes, here's this really interesting period of history that people are very interested and invested in and find very thrilling for whatever reason. And yet, if you try and write a historical novel, you're not going to have any cool chick characters. you know, like well not any great number, you know, and I mean, so gender's the first one they hit, the students of colour, they hit race straight away, because again, the lay understanding of the Middle Ages is very high. The other one is, the really interesting thing is that they don't realise that they've gone all the way past the boundary of supernatural without even realising it, that there actually were dragons in the Middle Ages. And you have to sort of remind them that, you know, I think Geraldine Heng said it so well, that, you know, the Middle Ages have become so associated with medieval romance that they sort of vanish into each other, and you don't have that border anymore. So.
Oh, I'm seeing some waving up the back.
I'm waving back. Can you hear me down there?
Yes.
Yes.
A little louder. Sorry, I thought that was absolutely fascinating. I just wondered though whether, in an attempt to bring a broader interpretation of the Middle Ages, and I'm certainly someone who works on not on high culture, not on high status people necessarily, but whether in an attempt to broaden out our understanding of the Middle Ages, we aren't just heading into something which is anachronistic and is too determined by our own perceptions of what we think society should be. So are we in danger perhaps of ignoring pogroms, persecutions, the fact that women really did have very low skills? And I think it's very interesting to want, for instance, Bohemia to be quite mixed racial, but would that necessarily, for instance, is that, are we putting too much? I just wonder if we're putting too much into, or risking putting too much of our own perception, which is slightly different, and in the same way Tolkien put his perceptions of society and what it should be in his writings, putting too much of our own perceptions of how society should be into our interpretations.
But isn't there, you know, ethnic cleansing, racial persecution, religious persecution happening now? It's not as if it's sort of, the now isn't necessarily a kind of utopic, I don't know, what.
No, we think it's bad, perhaps we think it's a bad idea in a way that we didn't think. Certainly, women having no property. We think that you get married and hand over a property. We think that's rather peculiar idea.
Not in every part of the world, though. I mean,
what I hear, what I'm slightly hearing in some of these interpretations is a bit, I'm just wondering whether there's a little bit of a modern liberal agenda being put on.
Well, there's certainly been conservative agendas and deeply embedded in the discipline for as long as it's existed. So I think
you deconstruct that one and pop another one on top of it.
Well, what else do you do? I mean,
I think of like two things. One is what musicology does. And I think of Daniel Leach Wilkinson's work on thinking about performing the past. I mean, I think they are much more honest about their relationship with the medieval past, because they have to deal with thinking about how exactly to perform these bits of evidence all the time. And they are very clear for them, they're never going to recreate the perfectly grammatically sealed medieval performance experience of this chansonnier from 13th century France. They are sort of like, it's always filtered through our own particular modern frames of what we understand the music is supposed to be. And that actually performance will change depending on each moment, depending on the period, depending on whether opera is up or folk music is down for the 20th century. So I don't think it's actually a form of anachronism as actually a form of our sort of filter through the scholarship. And this is coming out of musicologists who are, you know, serious musicology scholars. And I mean, if you know medieval musicologists, they've spent the last 100 years really doing source studies. So really, you know, they're just gotten into theory only very recently. So these are sort of, you know, what I think we would always consider bread and butter kind of medievalists. But the other thing I would say is are you thinking about the medieval, is it a temporal thing? Is it about the 500, or what we think of as 500, 1500? Or is it about a more flexible idea of that temporality and the question of anachronism? I mean, the Peninsular Iberian medievalists have an ongoing discussion about the fact that, in fact, the Middle Ages didn't end in Spain until the 19th century. Because of all the gold that they took from the New World, they didn't need to change, for several hundred years. So that sort of changes the frame of what we consider the Middle Ages. I mean, I think about the fact that ISIS is about to have their 2017 conference in Hawaii, and for them, the sort of South Pacific Middle Ages, we're talking about Easter Island. We're talking about, a temporal moment where all these sort of other things are happening. So that's actually the question I would have. Is it a temporal? Is it a sort of fixed idea? Is it geographical? Like, what are we thinking about in terms of that?
I think that's a key point, whether it's temporal or geographical, and it's much like, I hate to be nerdy, but it's very much like the whole concept of, space-time continuum, where you cannot divide space and time when you're studying space and time in sciences. It's one thing, and I think we struggle with that when we're studying the humanities and sociology and anthropology. We have a difficult time appreciating that Middle Ages in our culture, in the bubble of our world, is not Middle Ages conceptually in other worlds, and yet it is the same time. But so do we broaden the term of Middle Ages, or do we narrow the concept of time?
I think the other thing that you can think about is, and this doesn't just go for how we talk about the Middle Ages, but when you start worrying that somebody's doing something political, it's usually because they're doing something. I mean, everything we do is political. Yeah. All our readings of the Middle Ages are political. But when you start reading something in a new way, the politics show up more. Mm-hmm. When they're just in the background of what we're used to, we don't think of it as political. But when you start talking about something like race or taking a different perspective, suddenly the politics show, because they're different to the ones that have been there all along. So I think we're sort of now at a point where the discipline's changing a bit and changing its habits, and so the politics are showing. Okay, yeah, Frank.
So I'm going to be rather blunt, but there was the example of the woman who had
I'm checking to find out. I'm going to exit in a minute.
Yeah. And the point was made that it was the people that were responding to this, it was really about what they cared about, not about the Middle Ages. And I think that's a very valid point. But the obverse of that coin is that when we start inserting shield maidens into stories, it becomes more about what matters to us rather than about the Middle Ages. And I think it's rather disingenuous to claim other ones.
Okay, two points. Was this the example that I was talking about?
I think so.
Yeah. It wasn't inserting a woman into. It was talking about
historical.
The post that she received death threats and rape threats in response to drew on academic sources to say, well, one, whiteness as we currently understand it didn't exist in the Middle Ages. They had no concept of it. And to point out that in central Bohemia, you had different ethnicities coming into contact. And was not doing anything anachronistic in the first place. Whether or not one can do that anyway becomes, we're sort of blurring the lines a bit between what you can do in a video game and what you do in a classroom, or what you do when you're actually talking about history. And any video game, however realistic it claims to be, is not history. So they're always inserting, every character that's inserted there doesn't exist. They're always creating made-up things. That's what you do when you you're the expert.
Yeah.
But you make things up. And every character is made up.
So is your question about an idea of the sort of historical scholarly Middle Ages, or what is the question?
No, I mean, I think the point that I'm trying to make, maybe making it rather clumsily, is that when we insert a character into something like a video game or a story that is not somebody that one would normally, that is sort of thought of as part of the normal Middle Ages milieu. We are, and I personally am of the opinion that it's a good thing that such things should happen. We are nevertheless saying it's important for me. I mean, for example, in the recent Robin Hood movies that had an African or a sort of African American in the sort of comedy version character in them, there is a statement about it is important for me as part of the to now insert this new. We're saying something about what our own view is. There is in part of that conversation. It's not then anymore just about things that are medieval. It is also about our conversation with the medieval, and we become part of the focus too.
Well, I would push back and say, well, there are green people. There's archaeological evidence that there was Africans in England in the Anglo-Saxon period. There's this sort of like there's a huge Ethiopian back and forth with various words. I mean, we can go on. Not to mention the weird mythical creatures, section of the Greek period, and things like that. So I don't know if the point is necessarily about our own, as opposed to saying, in fact, the Middle Ages wasn't actually that sort of, monolithic, that it was actually this other thing. And I mean, I work on Jewish material, and we haven't even walked into that necessarily, or sort of any of the other sort of phase sort of swimming in and out. So I would actually say, well, actually, we would possibly find it strange, well, maybe not, if a video game decided to include green people, but historically, in historiography, it's there.
The other thing to think about is that in any video game or book or whatever, any cultural product is not made for the Middle Ages. It is made for us now.
Yes, it is.
And it's not just about, it's never about showing history. It's always about saying, okay, well, this is, yes, absolutely, you're right. This is the product that I want to see. This is the game that I want to play.
I mean, but it's a two-way conversation. You're seeing it as us putting into the past what we would like to see. But it's also a fact that we get to a point where we can see empirically things in the past which our own blinkers prevented us from seeing previously. So I think it was about a year ago in York, they found the grave of an African American who had lived there in the late Roman period.
That was African American.
No, sorry, an African, an African who lived there in the late Roman period, which also caused a lot of trouble. And I suspect that if that grave had been found perhaps 50 or 60 years ago, there'd have been doubt cast on it. We maybe wouldn't have heard about it because we weren't in a position to see that.
Or in a position to know it, because it was done through isotopes or DNA.
Yes, exactly. But
so there are assumptions about things.
Yeah. Where we are lets us see things which are not just what we want to see, but which may also have been there. And I can happily admit to anybody that in 50 years, perhaps we'll be seeing other things that I'm not able to see now, because the hardest thing to see is the gap, the thing that you don't recognize. But we can just keep being flexible and trying to see more gaps, minding the gaps, maybe.
We are going to, what time is the, okay. We've got time for a couple more questions. We've run about 15 minutes over. There was some. Oh yeah. My name is Ellie. Yep.
I was just going to say that, well, in medievalism that I'm doing, I kind of thought the crux of medievalism was that it was the medieval in a time after the medieval period. So isn't a big part of that interpretation after the medieval period? Isn't that a big part of it anyway? Is it like this kind of question of we're putting our own opinions about all people with their own opinions or viewpoints? Isn't that a really important part of the field of medievalism anyway?
Yeah, I think we're sort of slipping between medieval studies and medievalism studies without drawing particular distinctions because our own point.
We should actually be slippery, more slippery about that.
Well, admitting there is this thing called presentism. I keep finding from a literary point of view, and that's my main field, that the term medieval doesn't mean a lot, and that medievalism is a more helpful term. I'm reading, I don't know who wrote the manuscript, but I'm reading for press right now, a book that's arguing that Beowulf and Mallory are medievalism rather than medieval, because the authors reconstruct an earlier Middle Ages, and they base their texts thereof. And more, I'm struck by this at first. I thought this guy's bonkers, but then I thought, no, not bonkers. Because it is a totally different way of looking at it. It got me thinking that this is not presentism. And that part of our problem is that we've been hobbled by this term medieval, which was not a medieval term, Victorian term in some ways. And perhaps, though the Academy likes to beat up on the medievalists may actually have it right.
I think we can just take that as a compliment and move on. Maybe one more?
I'm just wondering if I'm thinking of something Richard said at Kalamazoo that might be helpful here, and everything that's sort of come up as making me think of this, that sort of we've had a tendency for a long time to relegate things that we don't like about our own period to the medieval, and at the same time, medieval studies has had this tendency to relegate things that we don't want to include in medieval studies to medievalism. And it seems like that's coming up here over and over again. And on the one hand, we don't want to think of sort of racial violence and oppression of women and all this stuff as part of our own period, which of course it is. So we want to relegate that to the Middle Ages, the oppressive, misogynist, violent Middle Ages. And at the same time, we or some of us don't want to think of, various sexualities or racial, well, I'm not sure what to call this. So the lack of race, right? The flexibility of race is something that we can think about in medieval studies. So somehow that gets kind of relegated into fantasy medievalism, and it seems like that's something that we're all kind of that's coming up over and over again in this discussion. I just thought might be helpful because I found it so illuminating when you said it.
Yeah, I think he is absolutely right, and I thank you for raising that point.
I mean, I think the big issue has to do with this kind of idea of cultural memory and who defines it, right? And whether it's an academic sphere that constructs it, or whether it's a repository of cultural fantasy, or a literary genre, or poetic appropriation, that I think we're all contesting that question. Who owns cultural memory? And I think whether we do it through academic discourse and evidence, or whether we do it through video games, we're all engaging in that debate or conversation.
Do we have time for one more question?
I just had a question that's completely not about what you guys are talking about right now, but instead of the global Chaucers, I'm thinking about pedagogy, and I'm just wondering how your students react to this project.
Sure.
And also, if you encourage them to come up with their own interpretations, the web of that or whatever, if that's part of the kind of creative engagement with it as well. So sorry to steer the conversation completely away, but yeah, I'm just wondering, how do they react to it?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it has to do with the particular students, but I think with the Brixton Market YouTube video, I think it'll be for a really interesting conversation, given my location in Washington, D.C. I happen to have students who are of Afro-Caribbean background, and asking that question, well, does that adaptation sound familiar? Does that seem like an interesting interpretation? And some of those things say yes, and some say no. What's the point of having this take place filmed in Brixton Market? You go there now in 2014, it's hipster, gentrified, it's no longer that kind of diasporic space. Well, you walk a few blocks to 8th Street in DC and similar things are happening. So again, I think there are ways of trying to bridge this weird artifact from the late 20th century, weird to them, right? It's British. That there are certain ways of connecting with it. And I think Carol can talk about her own experiences as well in terms of empowering students to make their own adaptations. I think if you get students to adapt, to pay close attention to the language and think critically about how they're reworking it, you're accidentally teaching them close reading and interpretation and all the things you want them to learn, right? But you're doing it differently. I don't know if Carol has any thoughts.
Yeah, there's no Caroline.
Okay. Look, we do have a plenary in here in 10 minutes, so I feel like we will have to have that as the last question. Thanks very much to the speakers. Thank you also very much to Andrew, who's been heroic. Working with the technology. My apologies to people where we didn't get to your questions either in the room or online. I know there are a few that came through that we didn't get to. If you want to put them in the comments section under the YouTube video, I'll do my best. I think the panelists might also engage with that. So yeah, if you want to leave them online, we'll try and answer them in due course. But yeah, thank you everybody for coming and listening and all of that. Thanks.